Oop. Okay. All right. So we've taken this big chunk. Uh, Other reading groups take this whole Sermon on the Mount and do it in 1 week. I decided to be compassionate and not do that to you, and also not to do that to me. Um, Bonhoeffer is dense and thick reading, so it takes a little bit, but I think we've arranged this over the next few weeks into some pretty manageable chunks. So I did want to repeat that Scotty, and does his wife have it as well?
He just said the test came back
A
positive.
test came back positive. Okay, so at least Scotty has COVID-19, our custodian. So keep him in your prayers. And I don't know if they're waiting on Pam's test or not, but we know that he does. So he said he was feeling better after he took some medication a couple of days ago. I talked to him Tuesday, I believe, and that's when I found out about this. So, but he says he's rebounded with whatever it was that the doctors gave him. So, but he probably still sounded like death warmed over on the phone.
Well, he was so bummed out about
He's
the
bummed.
positive test.
Yeah.
So it was hard to tell.
Anyway, let's keep him in. He lives up in Gainesville, so keep him in his family in your prayers. And again, Linda Pate's family from the passing of her cousin D.L. Garner. I saw a picture of him online. He looked to be pretty young. So let's just keep the entire family in our prayers as well. All right. And Linnell goes tomorrow for surgery on her hip, and Hinton announced earlier that if all goes well, she'll be coming home tomorrow night after a hip replacement. So let's pray for everything to go well tomorrow for that. So, all right, I'm going to pray and then we'll jump in. Father, for this day, we give you thanks and we ask your blessings on it. We thank you for Jesus. And we look today along with one of the martyrs and theologians of the 20th century, Bonhoeffer. We look at the Sermon on the Mount today, or at least the beginning of it. And we just ask your blessings on our time together and have it our words. We ask in Jesus' name. All right. So what I thought we'd do is just kind of bring us back in from where we left off. And then just dive into the 3 sections that we read for today. Just to kind of get us back into where we were when we left off about 3 weeks ago. The cup of suffering, Bonhoeffer states, the cup of suffering will indeed pass from Jesus, but only by his drinking. A lot of times we think that Jesus' prayers in the Garden of Gethsemane were not heard because he had to go through the crucifixion. He did ask for the cup to pass. It did, but only through his first suffering there. So that's something that Bonhoeffer brings out. And that cup has been passed along to his disciples. And so in our chapter for today, in the first 3 sections, of course, we start with the Beatitudes. And every discussion of the Beatitudes starts with what does the word blessed mean? Or if you've said it like this long enough, every time I see it, it's blessed. Blessed. I have real trouble saying just blessed. Blessed, blessed are. But Bonhoeffer's says that it's often used as a translation for a Hebrew word, which means deeply happy. But that doesn't mean what we think of as happy. Happy birthday, happy anniversary, things like that. With happiness is more feeling. Really depends on happenings. I've heard it said by a couple of folks, happiness depends on happenings. What's going on around us determines whether we're happy or whether we're sad. But the Hebrew word that Bonhoeffer points us to is a deep happiness grounded in our relationship with God. It is not So to even use the word happy is kind of misleading with the way that we think about it. But anybody else have any thoughts about what to be blessed or blessed? Blessed is. Just unmute yourself. I'm gonna go ahead and make sure I got everybody muted. Yeah. All right. Well, there we go. And then if you need to unmute yourself, just hit your space bar and have at it. So anybody on Zoom want to chime in on, Jesus keeps saying it over and over again here, blessed are. And so we have to start. What do you think he means? I mean, just we're not worried necessarily about what Bonhoeffer says here, but what about you?
One of the things that you have to remember when you read the Beatitudes, it says, blessed are those who, when something happens. So they usually have to go through that suffering, or whatever you want to call it, to be blessed. It's not like you're happy and you're going to be kept from that.
Yeah. It is true. That God will sometimes bring us out of situations, but most often he walks with us through, as he did with Jesus, so he will do with Jesus' disciples. Yeah.
Well, as you said, that blessed means happy, and all in the way we think of happy is based on things going on around us. But when you look at the Bible, it doesn't matter what's going on around you or whatever, you still have that happy feeling. God is there with you and going to see you through all of these things.
Mm-hmm. It's a state of being, right? Reality.
And
Go ahead, Crystal.
right. And to add a little bit more, on page 73, it talks about, as bearers of suffering, we stand in, or they stand in communion with the crucified. So he's, not that he's just with us, we are with him also.
That's right.
If we believe that.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And that gets into a little bit later, talking about how we have the righteousness of Christ. And we'll get into that when we get there. But yeah, that's absolutely right. Yes. But again,
James, on page 71 at the top, where it says Jesus calls his disciples blessed, the people hear it and are dismayed at witnessing what happens. That which belongs to the whole people of Israel, according to God's promise, is now being awarded to the small company of disciples chosen by Jesus. So when you read, blessed are the poor in spirit, I never read it like that. I always read it like that he was saying that to the whole crowd, for the benefit of the whole crowd. But he's saying, blessed are that small group because they have endured this. And I never read it that way, but.
Well, and it's interesting that you bring that up, because one of the things in this chapter that Bonhoeffer does, and I think there is one fact that may be able to shed a little bit of light. It's been a long time since I've read discipleship, so when I re-encountered it, I was kind of taken aback a bit as well. There is a distinction that Bonhoeffer makes between the disciples and the crowd, which you just pointed out. And that kind of, I was like, oh, this is going to be really something. I think one thing that will help us contextually speak is for us to remember that Bonhoeffer is writing this primarily for these students at his illegal seminary. And so I'm guessing here, these disciples are these pastors. These pastors who are going to be called to suffer. He does say that the crowd is the church. Okay, now he does go on later in the chapter in this to say that the crowd is the church. So we need to be careful about that. We're not talking about those that are in and those that are out. But I think he is expressing deeper intimations to those who will take that further step out of the crowd, the church, if you will, into, and then that creates a dichotomy here that I'm not too comfortable with, because I believe in the priesthood of all believers. If you ask Dietrich Bonhoeffer this, he would say he does too, where we are all servants of God. We are all priests. We are all, there is no hierarchy. This has led to so much trouble for the church. That's the preacher's job. That's not our job. That kind of dichotomy that said, like he's a better prayer, like he's a better preacher, whatever, or she is. And that has led to all kinds of trouble in the church. So I thank you for pointing that out, Sharon. That is true? Yeah.
I was reading this morning in Matthew chapter 13.
Yeah.
And that chapter was one parable right after another. And I saw something in there that I never had seen before. One of his disciples asked him why he spoke in parables. And he said it was because not everybody was supposed to know what those parables meant, that only his disciples were the ones who were supposed to really
Right.
truly understand what they meant.
Right. He spoke in parables. That's great. And thank you. Matthew 13, one parable after the other. Finally, why are you speaking in this code to the crowd? And he said, well, for you to know. These secrets are for you to know. No. So yeah, that's another kind of thing to throw into this pile. It's a great observation. So yeah. But it is an interesting thing that he does here, where Sharon pointed out. So we need to read this with that in mind. And I don't know if the contextual thing helps at all, but I do think he knew that faithfulness in the ministry for these pastors that he's writing to, their suffering is going to be intense as Jesus. And that's been one of the debates over the Sermon on the Mount since the beginning. Who's he speaking to? Because at the end of these Beatitudes, he goes along, blessed are the, blessed are the, blessed are the, blessed are the, and then he says, blessed are you. He changed. We'll get there. But he changed. So does he change? Does he shift who he's talking to here? And then we have to start thinking about, okay, well, for us, 2,000 years later, which of this is normal and which of this is normative in the life of the disciple? Which of it is bound to who he was speaking to that day, and which of this is bound for all time? And that's where it gets, So I'm kind of glad we have a limited amount of time. But no, it's a lot to think about. So, but let's keep going. And what I want to do is I want to run down these Beatitudes. And if you want to stop me at any of these, please do. Don't worry about interrupting. Let's get your thoughts in. We'll start with the first one. Jesus says the disciples are blessed because he says they are poor in spirit, which for Bonhoeffer means they gave up everything for the sake of the cause. And anytime I remember that, I think of that great song by Stephen Curtis Chapman from back in I think it was the late 80s or early 90s. We will abandon it all for the sake of the cause. Well, that is what Bonhoeffer interprets Jesus to me. That they have abandoned it all for the sake of the cause. So they're those that are poor in spirit. Secondly, blessed are those who mourn. And Bonhoeffer says that the reason they mourn is they mourn for the world in its lost state. They, along with creation, I think Paul talks about this in Romans, the creation groans, the creation mourns to be redeemed, to be renewed. And the creation itself recognizes that it is in a state of lostness. So disciples are blessed. Those that mourn are blessed because of the world in its lost state. That's the second one. The third one, they are meek because they've left their rights and their protection to God. They have forsaken their rights. Well, what about my rights? We hear a lot about that. What about my rights and my privileges? And Bonhoeffer says those that are meek have chosen to leave their rights and protection completely to God. They hunger. What they hunger for believe the verse is they hunger and thirst for righteousness. They hunger for perfect union with the Father. Nothing else matters. And when I say that, I'm not meaning to implicate that their families didn't matter, but remember they've left them, right? And we need to always keep this in mind, that these disciples that are around Jesus have left their families, at least for the time being, and they don't know when they're going back. So that they hunger for perfect union with the Father. Jesus says they're merciful, and what Bonhoeffer interprets this to mean is they have an irresistible love for the downtrodden. And I cannot stress this enough. And I'll give you an example. Ask Carol. Carol, on average, in a normal week, how many calls do we get at this church about the Netherlands?
Probably half dozen.
I think that's a lot.
I could, well, it's more some weeks, some less.
We
but-
usually get
but
6
yeah.
to 10, 6
Yeah.
to 10, maybe
Yeah.
some weeks we get 10 to 15. And there's no getting around it. That disciples of Jesus are called to be compassionate. And I hear everyone, I hear it, rules, rules, rules. Co-op has rules. You can only do this, you can only do that. I understand that, and I agree with that. Okay. But what's behind all of that, though, should be a heart for the downtrodden, for people who are oppressed, for our brothers and sisters of color. I think what we all need to do one day is we just need to get in the bus of the church and just go down and walk the streets of Atlanta on Sunday morning at 11 o'clock instead of meet here for worship and just kind of take a look around. Not in Buckhead, but down in around Peachtree Center and areas such as that, and just acquaint ourselves. We don't even really need to do that. We can go here to Lawrenceville for that. But I say that because disciples should have a heart for the downtrodden, and they come in all kinds of shapes and sizes: economic downtrodden, emotionally downtrodden, racially downtrodden. Those that have been denied justice. Our hearts should be turned toward them, merciful toward them, and I think most times we do well with that. I really do, but we've all got room to improve. But Jesus says, "Blessed are the merciful, because their hearts are turned toward the downtrodden." Okay, blessed are the pure in heart. Again, some of this is going to be kind of repetitious, but Bonhoeffer says those that are pure in heart, they've surrendered completely to Jesus. And that's going to be important when we come to the section about the righteousness of Christ, when Jesus says, "Don't think that I've come to abolish the law." Marcion did not like that. I hope you read that. The heretic from the second century heretic Marcion didn't like that. So he actually changed that verse in his Bible. And I admire him, for guts, but he got slapped down on that one. Marcion didn't like the Old Testament at all. So by the way, some called Andy Stanley a modern day Marcion because of his book Irresistible, where he basically says the New Testament needs to be unhitched from the Old Testament, and he lays out a compelling case in the book. I've read, but Jesus says no, we can't do that. But we'll get to why Bonhoeffer says we shouldn't do that. All right, so peacemakers. There we go. I saw a lot of posts yesterday on Facebook and Twitter about peacemakers. Says blessed are the peacemakers, enduring suffering rather than inflicting it on others. And that goes back to Jesus. If someone slaps you, turn the other cheek and all that stuff. And we're not going to get into that today, but basically it's that call to endure suffering. It's that cruciform life. And then and then it changes. Blessed are you who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. And because you're going to be rejected for your message and the works that accompany it. And he makes And another reason is they're persecuted because they've answered Jesus' call. And that actually starts in Jerusalem there. The Jews reject the disciples. We hear more about that in Acts, but they rejected Jesus. They're going to reject the disciples. Jesus says in one place, if they called me all kinds of names, what do you think they're going to call you? If they killed me, what do you think they're going to do to you? And I think that's one of the things that drove Judas to betray Jesus. So that's basically the teachings on the Beatitudes. So I want to stop here and just say, anyone have anything else they want to add from the book, or a clarifying question or anything? Statement?
Yeah, I got one.
Yeah, go ahead, Henry.
Reading the book here where it says, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake.
Yep.
You said those, blessed are you. Is that a different translation that you're getting the you out of?
Mhm.
Because he
That's-
says who.
Blessed are you. It changes to you. Now, this is
On page 77.
I'm
77.
Yeah, in the middle it
The
says,
middle.
blessed are
blessed are
those
those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. For
instead of you. That's the reason I was wondering if
Yep.
you were getting the you out of a different translation.
No, let me see here. Let me see here. Let me see. They probably went to the New American Standard there. I think the New Revised Standard. I'm not sure which translation these books use. Let me go to Matthew 5. Because he does turn the spotlight on to them. Matthew 5, and that's where we at, verse blah, 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 blah. Let me see what verse are we. Let me see, verse 13, I believe. Nope, a little bit further down. Yeah, verse 11. This is the next verse, and I apologize. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Blessed are you, and men revile you and persecute you. It's the very next verse, and he does speak to that. He turns the camera on to you, and that's
It's on
it's the next page.
78,
It's
yeah.
the next page.
Top of the page.
I see it on the next page.
There you go. Yeah. So there
Yeah,
you go.
I was just wondering if you were reading from a different translation.
No, sir.
What he had.
No, we were on different verses. That's good, though. I'm glad you asked. Blessed are you. Yeah, and he turns it from blessed are those to blessed are you. So yeah, I was the verse ahead there. So, but yeah, so he eventually turns it on to us.
And that could also be too, because in the way he was looking at it was like Jesus was up on the hill talking to his disciples, and everybody else was down here, and they possibly could or could not hear what he was saying.
Very well could have been.
And because he was talking to his disciples, then he changed to blessed are you, because that's who he was talking to.
Well could have been. Yeah, that's good. All right. Anybody else? The Beatitudes. Everybody cool? By the way, the wrong way to go about these Beatitudes, and I learned this from experience. The wrong way to go with these is to say something like, the trouble with the trouble with us is we're not blessed because we're not poor in spirit. So come on, everybody. If you want to be blessed, you got to be poor in spirit. So we're going to be poor in spirit and use these exhortations as if this is something that we can muster up and do. We can't. These are inner dispositions, which only through the power of the Holy Spirit can be cultivated. This isn't something we can work up. Oh, we're going to be poor in spirit. We either are or we aren't. That's not, it's not one of those things that we can, just as a group, just kind of make that. And that applies for all of them, all of the Beatitudes. So, all right, let's move on to the visible community. And really, I thought this was pretty straightforward. He says, you are the salt of the earth. Jesus does, of course, but it suggests three things: purity, preservation, and flavor. And we've had this conversation about being salt of the earth before, so I won't belabor this, but salt in the Roman world suggested purity because of the process of using seawater. I found this interesting. They use seawater and the sun to acquire the salt. I didn't know that. Salt was used, of course, to preserve meat. Salt loses itself in service. Now, this is interesting. Salt loses itself in service to the object being salted. Thus, it provides flavor. So, I use John Sharon as an example. You talked about passing on the chosen. When you do things like that to your daughters, you know, you're being salt. You're losing yourself in trying to bring flavor and preservative to their life in the form of sharing the good news in that manner. Now, you probably didn't say anything. Probably didn't know this be the gospel according to the chosen or whatever. Something crazy like that. But you gave it to them, and the heart behind it. You're being salt when you do things like that. You just are. I mean, we're being salt when we don't, and I don't do a very good job. Carol can be witness to this. She has been. We're being salt when we don't lose our minds when somebody drives like a, you know,
Well, you can give salt, but you can't guarantee they're going to be flavored because
sure.
we did pass on those to our daughters.
Yeah.
One daughter got her family around, and all of them viewed it with great enthusiasm and can't wait for the second series. The other one hasn't read it yet or hasn't shown it yet. So you can't guarantee people are going to take it and do it, but you know, you've got to give it to them.
Yeah. And I think for a biblical example of losing oneself, being salt to another, one need only look to the parable of the Good Samaritan. You see in that parable, the Samaritan is indeed being salt for preserving the life of the man in the ditch. So that's the kind of thing that salt does for us. Now, the salt metaphor grounds the disciples in reality. Okay. And this is another thing that I think we as church in the evangelical world have really missed the boat on. You have an earthly task to perform, and you cannot think of only heaven. We cannot. And I think that's one of the things with our focus on. Boy, I tell you what, I'm really sorry that you're going through a hard time right now, but one day there's not going to be any poverty. There's not going to be any of this or that. Or I'm sorry that your husband abused you. But one day, when the roll is called up, I love that song, but there's something to do here. And that's not social gospel per se. It's just, there's elements of social gospel. But if you notice, Jesus was always on the street. Did you ever notice that? Always in somebody's house. And he was at the temple, he was at the synagogue. That was his custom. But most everything we get from him until the last week of his life is where? On the street, out in the world. It's not in the church. It's all with the people. So there is an element of that, and I think we need to be a better balance of that. I think the heavenly reward is true. Okay, but it can be emphasized so much to where, oh well, we'll just sit on our blessed assurance until Jesus comes back, and maybe that'll be today, and maybe it will. I hope so. So that's kind of the salt. It grounds us in reality. And then, of course, the light of the world indicates that the life of the disciple must be visible. This is Bonhoeffer again. The good works of the disciple should be seen and should point to the source of their call. Why do you do these things? To give glory to God. Period. They should point to the source of their call, Jesus and the cross. Everything we do should point to the cross. I've said this before. You know the looks I get in restaurants because of this thing right here. And I'm not making this up. My Spider-Man mask is a lot more popular than this thing right here. Because right now, unfortunately, this thing right here speaks to clergy abuse. speaks to many abuses of church. But to me, it speaks of the heart of my life. And it speaks to the one of whom I am to emulate and imitate. And it does. This is the source of our call. I mean, Jesus is, of course, but this Jesus crucified is the source of our call. And I'm not ashamed of the cross. You know, and I've heard that somewhere before. You know, I think Paul said that. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. I'm not. It is the power of God to save. It really, really is. So we need to be out there. We need to be visible. We don't need to hide from the world. Jesus didn't. He did not. All right. And the final thing in this one is Bonhoeffer suggests that the bushels, you know, hide it under a bushel. No, I'm going to let it shine. That the bushels that cause the disciple to hide the light might be fear of men or conformity to the world for some ulterior motive. Jesus said it himself. There are plenty of wolves dressed as sheep in the church, especially in leadership positions. There are plenty of them. What other bushels do we use? You know, we think about that. What other bushels might we use to hide our light? Not necessarily maybe fear of men or conformity to the world for some ulterior motive. That all sounds high and wonderful. What other bushels might we use to hide our light? What can you think of?
I think sometimes when you wear a cross, you're expected to behave in a certain way.
You bet.
And if you are wearing that cross, you usually do behave mostly in that way. But there are times whenever you lose your cool or you lose that spirit,
Oh, yes.
and you're no longer a reflection of that cross. And so sometimes we just don't do it. And yeah, because we don't want to be judged,
That's right.
one of those religious fanatics or something.
Yeah, guilty. Yeah, I sit before you today. There have been times I should have taken this thing off and thrown it across the room because it did not deserve a place around my neck. Yeah. And one of the reasons that I took the price Panther and put it right in front of me at my computer is, you know, that great verse. He never, you know, he never sleeps. He never slumbers. He's watching. He watches us. You know, and in Revelation, we've been studying, you know, he walks among the lampstands. And as you know, those lampstands are churches. And there he is, walking amongst them. Now, that's good news. Matter of fact, that's great news. But, you know, it's also, you know, he's there. You know, so a healthy fear of the Lord, not being afraid of him, but just a healthy fear of the Lord. I mean, the Proverbs says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of the wisdom. It's the beginning of knowledge, you know. Yeah. So, yeah, I agree with you. There are other things we know. We don't want to be a religious fanatic. We don't want to be characterized as a religious fanatic. You know, Jesus didn't have a problem with that. It's amazing. He was a fanatic. He flat loved God and didn't mind telling anybody about it. And he wore a cross on his back.
The only time that is a problem is the Pharisees for fanatics too.
Yes, they are.
When you use the wrong motive to glorify yourself rather than God.
Yes. And again, at times guilty as charged. You didn't charge me, but I accept it. Yeah, go ahead.
Pastor James, that's why I had a question mark to it, but I think you really just answered on the top of page 82.
Okay, let's take a look.
You know, you can start anywhere, but it may also be an even more dangerous and so-called Reformation theories, who I
Yeah,
think he was talking about, you know, the Pharisees, you know, they were high, you know, they were hidden, or they thought they were shining a light, like you say, with the cross,
yeah.
and they wasn't.
A humble invisibility, a theology that came out of the Reformation, the Theologia Crucis.
Mhm.
How did I do, Sharon? Did I do okay with that? The Theologia Crucis, theology of the cross, and the signature of that is that you prefer a humble invisibility in the form of total conformity to the world over Pharisaic visibility. So the
Pharisaic.
Pharisees are out there. Look at us. You remember Jesus? He says, "Beware of the Pharisees. They like to say long prayers and they like to wear their robes and oh, wear a robe." But anyway, they like to wear their robes and they like to be seen by people and have the places of the best seats in the house and and honor and all that. You remember he said that? He says, "Don't be that." He says, "But also." Don't be this humble, invisible person in total conformity to the world. And you don't want to offend anybody. You don't, you're humble. We just want to, we just want to love and everybody get along. And, it can't be either of those two. It's somewhere in the middle. It's somewhere in the middle where you wear the cross, but you're not wearing it like, look at me, you wear the cross. And by the way, Sharon, you are right. Most times it's a great behavior way for me to, right when I get ready to say something I know I shouldn't say. I wish I would look at it more often. Maybe I need to wear it here. But yes, and I'm glad, Crystal. I'm glad you brought that up.
I want to,
Yeah, the light should not shine. Keeping on going, it says here, it's identified by its fitness to function within the justitia civilis, which is basically the world, social order. Here, the criterion for Christianity is considered to be that the light should not shine. Okay, you should not shine it. Just conform. Just be part of the world. What we'll do is we'll take Christianity, we'll put the church, and we'll put it right here, and we'll put its silo right here, right next to politics, right next to sports, and it just becomes a part of your private life, and not anything to do with weightier things. Weightier things. But Jesus says, no. He says, and I'll keep reading there. He says, no, let your light shine before the Gentiles. And it says Jesus is called, in any case, it is the light of Jesus' call which is shining. And we could definitely go on and on here, but it's the cross. It is the cross, that despicable and scary reality in the life of the first century Jewish folks in the Roman Empire and others. Anybody that ran afoul of the Romans could find themselves attached to a cross. And so, but it is the light of Christ and the resurrection, of course. So we need to be careful with that. All right, we're running out of time. Let me get to the righteousness of Christ. This conversation bleeds perfectly over into, as you would expect, the fundamental presupposition of the Sermon on the Mount is that Christ, remember now, Matthew wrote his gospel to Jews, trying to convince them that Jesus was Messiah. So here we have Jesus on a mountain, the new Moses, in quotes, on a mountain. Okay, he didn't need to go up on a mountain to be with God. He was God. He went up on a mountain and he taught the new law to his people from there. And scholars have detected 5 distinct sections in the Sermon on the Mount, which corresponds, of course, to the 5 books of the Torah: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The Psalms are broken up into 5 books, which are meant to mirror again the Torah. Maybe not so much in content, but in structure. So, but the fundamental presupposition of the Sermon on the Mount is that Christ came to fulfill Old Testament law. Sorry, Marcion, sorry. Jesus alone fulfilled the law because only he lived in perfect communion with God. Okay? Just because the disciples are bound to Jesus, they must fulfill the law as he does. Now, how did he fulfill the law? My Bonhoefferians, how did Jesus fulfill the law? There's one word.
Crucified.
Yeah, he was crucified. That's the fulfillment of the law, right yonder. Yep, we'll keep going. Better righteousness, I think a term that Bonhoeffer uses. Better righteousness than the Pharisees. Jesus says your righteousness needs to exceed that of the Pharisees. What that means is we follow Christ in a real and active faith in Jesus' righteousness. We cannot do it without that. Jesus has given us a new law, the law of Christ. All right. So we need to remember that. We need to remember that. I'm not going to get into the more ticklish details of this discussion here. It can bog you down. But do you have any questions or comments about this righteousness of Christ section here? I don't want to, there's a lot here. But I disagree. I've come to love many of the facets of the ministry of Andy Stanley. But I disagree with him about the need to unhitch the Old Testament. I can see how it leads to many questions. I can see his point about the belief in the resurrection and that is what powered the early church through. It really is. But I'll take a story from Jesus, the resurrected Christ on the road to Emmaus in Luke 24. Now he's talking to Jews, of course. But what did he use when he was explaining? Oh, you foolish of heart and slow to, and he wasn't critiquing them. He was just saying, my goodness, it's right there in your Bible and you missed it. And what Bible was that? That was the Hebrew Bible. And he took to explaining from there. So I think we need to dig deeper into exactly how Jesus fulfills the law and how the Genesis through Malachi for us, Genesis through 2nd Chronicles for the Hebrew folks. They're all in there. They're just in a different order. How does that play into our lives as Christians? And it really does. A lot of things that we seek to follow are right there in the text of the Old Testament. But that's not what Jesus is talking about. It was through his suffering. Bonhoeffer says it's through his suffering that he fulfilled the royal law. So we can get into it a little bit more as we go. Okay.
James, I think that one of the things that is kind of apparent is that there was the law that was given by God, and then there were laws that were added to it by the Jewish authorities, which those aren't necessarily the laws that need to be fulfilled.
Right. The ones in the Bible are the ones that need to be fulfilled. The commentary on it, Mishnah, which is what you're talking about, where they said, okay, well, what is work? And then they laid out 365 different definitions of work. And I think what Bonhoeffer states in the book is that love of the law was mistaken for God. The law. So what happened was the Pharisees were in love with the law, but they thought that was God. He says, but you can't go the other way either. Jesus said, you can't just toss it out. I didn't come to toss it out. I came to fulfill it. But you're right.
It's like whenever he said, is it a sin to take your donkey out of the gully just because it's Sunday? No, you have to use compassion and judge it by that.
Love first. Love first. Love and concern first. Always. And that has to do with the healing of a blind man. Which one of you would, if you had a donkey fall into, as you said, a ditch, wouldn't go right away on the Sabbath and pull it out. And shouldn't this guy, who's been crippled for years, not be healed? And they're like, no, but he healed him anyway. So yeah, you're right, Sharon. It's good. Love first. Jesus would agree. I think that's true. All right. I don't have exactly what we're supposed to read next week, but I send it to you, and I'll send it to you again as a reminder. But keep plugging away. Get on Hoyt. Don't get on Hoyt.
I got one more thing, Pastor James. I didn't know I was on mute because I couldn't get your attention. That second paragraph on page 86,
Yeah.
I think is good. God is the giver, the Lord is of the law, and the Lord of the law, and it is fulfilled only in personal communion with God. There is no fulfillment of the law without communion with God. There is also no communion with God without fulfillment of the law.
That's right. You
I just-
can't have one and not have the other. That's
Yeah.
right. The Pharisees were more interested in fulfillment of the law, and what they were missing was the communion part. Yep. They missed it. Because how else could they have missed Jesus? If they'd been in full communion with God, we got a totally different story coming out of the first century. If they'd have been in total communion. So yeah, that's good. Thank you, Peggy.
Mm.
All right, guys, take care. Don't get on Hoyt because Hoyt's got a lot going on. So,
Yes.
but check in on him. I'm going to too. All right. God bless you all. Have a wonderful weekend. And I look forward to seeing you guys on Sunday, Lord willing. All right. Take care, everybody.
Thanks. It was a great session.
Thanks, everyone.
Mhm.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.